1 month after her mother disappeared, Savannah Guthrie returned to a quiet Tucson home, not for answers, but for something else entirely. What she found there wasn't evidence or updates from investigators. It was a message left by a community that refuses to stop hoping. And that detail changes how this story is understood. Because this visit wasn't about the past, it was about what still might be possible. On March 2nd, Savannah Guthrie arrived at her mother's house alongside her sister Annie and her brother-in-law Tommaso. It was the first time the family had returned together since Nancy Guthrie went missing weeks earlier. The home itself was quiet, but the space around it was not. Near the mailbox, neighbors had created a tribute: yellow flowers, ribbons, handwritten notes, not as a memorial, as a signal. Yellow ribbons have long represented hope during times of uncertainty, especially when someone hasn't come home yet. According to neighbors, the display wasn't organized by any group or authority. It happened organically. One person placing flowers, another adding a ribbon, until the message became impossible to miss. And this is where the story subtly shifts. Because the community knew something many people forget in cases like this. Hope doesn't expire on a timeline. Savannah later shared a photo of the tribute online. In the caption, she didn't ask for attention. She asked for something else. She asked people not to stop hoping. That choice of words matters, because by this point, publicly available information had already painted a complex and painful picture. Nancy was last seen on the evening of January 31st entering her garage. When she failed to show up for a virtual church service the next day, her family reported her missing. Investigators later confirmed that surveillance footage from the home showed an unknown individual approaching the property during the early morning hours. According to authorities, the doorbell camera stopped transmitting shortly afterward. What followed raised more questions than answers, and one specific digital detail would quietly become one of the most discussed elements of the case. Officials stated that Nancy's pacemaker connection to her phone app was disabled hours later. What that means, and what it doesn't, has been carefully clarified by investigators. No conclusions have been publicly drawn, and no suspect has been identified. The case remains active. The Pima County Sheriff's Office, working alongside the Federal Bureau of Investigation, has emphasized that leads continue to develop, even if progress feels slow to the public. And that uncertainty is exactly what the Guthrie family is living with every day. Savannah has remained in Arizona with her siblings since the investigation began. Rather than retreating from the spotlight, she has used it carefully, sharing updates, encouraging tips, and speaking directly to anyone who might know something, but always with restraint, always without accusation. Because instead of anger, her messages focus on something unexpected: belief. In one emotional video, Savannah acknowledged a reality many families in similar situations face but rarely say out loud: that they understand multiple outcomes are possible, not as surrender, but as honesty. What she asked for wasn't certainty, it was clarity. And that distinction explains why this story continues to resonate far beyond Tucson. As days turned into weeks, the family made a decision that would quietly redefine their approach. They didn't step back, they leaned in carefully. Instead of speculating or assigning blame, Savannah focused on visibility. She shared messages across social media, spoke through verified interviews, and used her platform on Today to explain something crucial: how tips actually work. Because many people assume coming forward is complicated or risky. According to publicly shared information, tips can be anonymous. They can be small. They don't require certainty, just honesty. This clarification wasn't dramatic, but it was strategic, and it coincided with another significant step. The family announced an increased reward, up to $1 million, for information leading to Nancy's recovery, in line with federal criteria. The FBI's separate reward also remained active, but money was never presented as the main motivator. Savannah's language stayed consistent, measured, human. In one message, she spoke directly, not with threats or demands, but it's true, but with reassurance that it's never too late to do the right thing, that people are not defined by their worst moment. That coming forward can still change the outcome. That tone is rare in cases like this. and it's intentional. Behind the scenes, investigators continued their work. Officials reiterated that the case remained open, active, and evolving. Resources were adjusted as leads developed. Patrol presence in the neighborhood continued. No public suspect, no public timeline, no simplified explanation. And yet, the story didn't fade. Part of that is because Savannah consistently widened the lens. She emphasized that her family's experience is not unique, that thousands of families live in the same uncertainty, often without media attention, without resources, without an audience. That perspective led to another quiet but powerful decision. The Guthrie family donated a significant sum to the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, directing attention beyond their own situation. And this is where the narrative shifts again, from one missing person to a much larger reality. Savannah explained that if awareness around her mother could help even one other family be heard, then it mattered. This wasn't framed as closure. It wasn't framed as acceptance. It was framed as responsibility. Still, the emotional toll remained visible. In a deeply personal video, Savannah described the waiting, the silence, the unanswered questions, the constant recalculating of hope. She acknowledged that uncertainty can be heavier than knowing the outcome. Yet even there, her words avoided finality. She didn't ask people to grieve. She asked them to stay present, because as long as a question remains unanswered, the story isn't finished. And that brings us back to the house in Tucson, the flowers, the ribbons, the notes left by people who never met Nancy, but felt compelled to stand with her family. Those gestures weren't about solving the case. They were about refusing to let it disappear. When people talk about missing person cases, they often focus on timelines, footage, and unanswered questions. But standing in front of that mailbox in Tucson, the story became about something else. It became about what remains when certainty is gone. The yellow ribbons didn't offer answers. They offered presence. They reminded the Guthrie family, and everyone watching, that hope doesn't require proof to exist. It only requires people who refuse to look away. For Savannah and her siblings, this visit wasn't a conclusion. It was a pause, a moment to acknowledge the weight of not knowing, while still choosing to believe that clarity, in some form, is possible. Investigators continue their work, leads continue to be evaluated, and the case remains open. That matters, because stories like this don't end when headlines slow down. They continue quietly, inside families, neighborhoods, and communities that carry the waiting forward. And it raises a broader question. What happens to cases after the cameras leave? Who keeps the light on when public attention moves on?